This is the Morning Tempo podcast. I am your host, Robanzo. On this podcast, I have conversations with business owners and the entrepreneurial with the slant toward creativity. It's an opportunity for you to learn with me from people who are finding success in the business world, all intended to make your entrepreneurial journey a little bit easier. Welcome to another episode. Thank you for sticking me in your earbuds or playing me on your speakers today. I'm honored. It's been a while since I've had a new episode. November of last year, 2020, the lost year. As I'm recording this, it is January 26th. You're hearing it in February, early February, hopefully, if everything goes as planned. In the year 2021, last episode was with Max Brandstetter of Max Podcasting. That was a cool episode. You should check it out. But this one is with a local gal here in Panama, where I am located. Panama in Central America. Not in Miami. Not in South America. Central America. I make fun. I probably would have said or thought one of those two way back when, before I lived here. But Jacqueline Bedke is the principal of Tierra Mia Organicos, a farm located not terribly far from where I am, by the beaches. She is my guest for this episode. Tierra Mia is known today as a free-range organic chicken and egg producer. I don't recall who introduced me to the company, but I've been a fan for a while, as I'm a fan of organic free-range chicken and all things organic when I can get my hands on it. Or all things that are grown and harvested and sold with care. That's what I'm a big fan of. For last Thanksgiving 2020, the lost year, I decided to cook a free-range chicken, which I got from Tierra Mia. Just before the holiday, Jacqueline invited me to come up and see the farm, so I took a neighbor and good friend of mine, Edgardo, with me, and I was blown away. I think he really enjoyed it too, but I was blown away by what Jacqueline has created. She gave us a wonderful impromptu tour, showing us the many hen houses and pastures, the egg inspection, prep, and packaging lines, the land rehabilitation projects she's got going on there. That day, she also shared with us her philosophy on organic and sustainable farming, and she let us take some pics with one of her hens, which I will post in the show notes of this episode. I think it's worth seeing. We both look pretty happy, me and the hen. And Edgardo, too. Maybe I'll put Edgardo up there. Tierra Mia supplies eggs and chicken to major grocers in Panama, including Reba Smith, Deli Gourmet, and Organica. These are all big names here. And luckily for me, does consumer deliveries for the local community, which has been super nice during this time of the pandemic, which rages on as I record this. The company ethos, as per the website, reads like this in Spanish. Let's hope I get my pronunciations right. Todos los días vamos a trabajar con la esperanza de hacer dos cosas: compartir alimentos frescos y saludables con su familia y ayudar a que el mundo sea un poquito mejor. And in English, every day we go to work hoping to do two things: share fresh, healthy food with your family, and help make the world a better place. Jacqueline told me after our conversation there were a couple things she forgot to mention. She was frustrated. But among the guidelines for the business are the health of its consumers. She actually does mention this. And she also says the animal welfare. And it's pretty much implied in our conversation, but these are among some key guidelines for the business. She also, I don't know that we talk much about this, but she plans to start growing veggies again. They currently use rotational pasture of their hens, the rotational pasture of their hens for growing rice and corn, whereby the chickens clean their growing space out for planting, and she's working out a similar system for growing vegetables. This won't be her first rodeo with vegetables, but it's been a while, which you'll hear. In this conversation, though, I wanted to learn about and share Jacqueline's story and tell the story behind her business. I feel like she and I totally accomplished this, and consequently, I didn't dig too deep into her personal habits or insights as a business owner, which I kind of try to do in these conversations, although this comes out somewhat organically. But this is a story of real inspiration. Jacqueline pursued a dream, faced adversity, and has come through the other side, a shining star of the local business community here in Panama. She is doing things with a purpose of ethics, with principle, and dare I even say, with a kind of spirituality. I've not shared this with her, but the day we met in person at the farm, as my friend Edgardo and I listened and walked with her through the farm, learning about the operational parts of the business and her philosophy, I was in a bit of awe. We didn't even know one another that well, but she struck me as a smart, class act fighter. When you hear her story I think you will agree. You can find Tierra Mia Organicos at tierramiaorganicos.com or .com, and on Instagram at Tierra Mia Organicos. Okay, I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. Here is me and Jacqueline Bedke of Tierra Mia Organicos. Thank you for making time to join me. First of all, I really appreciate it because I know you were kind of nervous about doing this.
Yeah, I've never done this before, but thank you for inviting me.
Sure.
Yeah, so,
well, hopefully
this is my first time.
Hopefully someone else will hear you, and this will be the beginning of a long history of people wanting to interview you on podcasts or something.
Oh gosh, okay. Okay, no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. No pressure. Kidding. So I was looking back at my photos on my phone, and I was trying to remember, when did we go? I feel like it was the holidays when I went to see your farm. It was on November 21st, so it was Thanksgiving week, right? Right? That's like the week, maybe like the month. No, it was probably like Friday or Saturday before.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, because you gave
Yes, I was...
gave me an order for Thanksgiving.
Yes, I was so excited to have an organic whole chicken to cook for my Thanksgiving, because for those listening and don't already know this, but my wife is vegetarian, so she's not going to eat any poultry or anything that resembles something that was formerly an animal that was alive. But so I can make a whole chicken though for myself. And you made it happen. It wasn't easy, but you made it happen, and it was really great, by the way.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you.
Yeah. And also on that day, the tour was really great. I know it was, for anyone who listens and gets a big idea that they're going to call you for a tour. I don't know if you give those on a regular basis at all anymore, but it was very impromptu, very kind of you to allow me and my friend Edgardo to come in. You just did, I guess, sort of maybe a little favor for us and gave us a really nice tour. I loved it. I have as you may have gathered, I have no background in the things that you have created there, but I'm very fascinated by it. Of course, the sort of whole food organic aspect of it, but the nature of it, and so many other facets that we'll get into in the conversations. But for the first thing I want to ask you is to go back and have you refresh my memory and enlighten listeners of this podcast as to where you grew up.
Oh, wow. That could take an hour. No, well, my background is very mixed. I was, I kind of traveled a lot. I mean, I was all over the place, but I grew up in Europe. I say Europe because it was between countries. So I was originally born in Vienna, Austria, and in the city, but, raised by a single mom. And so quite frequently, I would actually be moved to my grandparents' house as well in Slovenia. So I was kind of between those two countries for my first few years. And during when I was living in Slovenia, my grandparents also lived in the city, but they had rented like a little, if you could call it, apartment on a traditional farm. And so I spent a very significant amount of time on that farm during my childhood. And then I moved a lot later on when I was a little older, and I moved to Canada and all sorts of places. But I started off between, if you want to call it, Austria and Slovenia.
Okay. So I would imagine that the farm aspect of it was very memorable, but so as to dedicate more of our time talking about your farm here in Panama, I'll try and just ask you this question in a way that maybe it's a little brief, but are your fondest memories of your youth in those areas of like Central Europe and between Austria and Slovenia?
I think that farm and the farm was my grandparents were mountaineers, and as I said, I was predominantly raised by them, actually, somewhere between them and my mother. And so where the farm was located was actually kind of like it was kind of like a stop between just before a valley in the Slovenian Alps, where my grandparents loved to mountaineer. So for them, it was kind of a stop to then start going up the different peaks all the time. You know, they love to do that. And so for them, it was that. But for me, it was the farm. So, and I think just the times in between our, mountaineering trips, that's what I enjoyed the most. I wasn't big into the mountaineering as much because I just love green, everything that's green, and the peaks in the Alps are just bare. So I enjoyed it up until the end of the forest line, and then after that it was like, okay, do I have to? As I was a kid. But everything else that was below the forest line and that was green and lush, I loved it, and those are my best memories.
Wow. So for a city boy like me, and maybe anyone else who listens who grew up in suburbia, when you say mountaineering, are you talking about like hiking, or is there something a little more? You said your grandparents were mountaineers. What does that mean exactly?
Okay, so yeah, that's a good question. It was hiking, but the Slovenian Alps are pretty technical when you get higher up. So we never had to take, even though my grandfather, he has used ropes before and stuff, but when he would take me, it was never with ropes or anything like that. But in the peaks there already, actually in Slovenia, mountaineering is such a huge part of the culture that the ropes, they have permanent, cables and stuff on a lot of those peaks. So you don't actually have to bring any of your own gear.
Wow. That sounds amazing.
Yeah. And there's, it's pretty upright in a lot of places where you look down like hundreds of meters. So yeah, it gets a little scary, but I was used to that. So I didn't find it scary. Now I would find it scary. So, yeah.
Wow. Sounds lovely. Okay, let's jump to your studies in biochemistry. I was both fascinated and I'll use the word delighted when you mentioned this during the tour that we did, because as I mentioned, my wife has a somewhat similar educational background in the sciences, and I was thinking, oh man, she would really appreciate all this stuff. But tell me about your studies and maybe where your career touched some of the biochemistry things and other things that you did in school. Okay,
well, I did my studies in Canada. So I finished my high school there, and then I had to figure out what I wanted to study. And I couldn't really figure out what I wanted to do because, when you're young and you're not exposed to everything yet, so you can't really make any good decisions. I wanted to be a vet, and then I decided I didn't want to be a vet because it was just too painful. I was too involved with the animals. And then I was kind of stuck. I didn't know what to do. But then I discovered I was a big health nut always. My father gave me this book once. It was called, I remember, the Earl Mandel's Vitamin Bible. And I was fascinated by it because Earl Mandel is a biochemist, and he wasn't just about what vitamins there are, but he would talk about what vitamins you can take in order to help improve your metabolism for this, for that, everything from hair loss to whatever. And then he would even go further than vitamins. He would talk about other therapeutics, and he was, from my knowledge, one of the first people that really, I think, got into the whole era of, nutritional supplements and so on that weren't just herbs, but it was more beyond that. It was real biochemistry. And I was fascinated by it. And then I took a biochemistry course in university when I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was just like, this is it. I need to do this. This is so cool. I remember the first lab project we did, we are isolating caffeine from black tea. And I was like, oh my God, that is so cool. I don't know why I found it was cool, but I needed to learn that because I felt like it was the basis of life. And I loved life. I loved everything that was green. I loved everything that was alive, that already from an early age. So when I felt like I was learning the basis of life, that's when I said that I have to study that.
So there's, I guess, a good connection here. I'm trying to remember the name of the, looked like it was a paper or something very specific to your studies. Forgive me for not knowing. You have your studies, do you have a master's or PhD?
I don't have either because I focused on technology. So I have a degree in chemical and pharmaceutical technology because I like the whole aspect. And then I did an undergrad degree in biochemistry in another university. So I really like the practical and the lab aspect of it. And I didn't want to go into research. I considered it, but then I decided not to. So I worked a lot in industry.
Oh, I was going to blame my lack of knowledge on this, what I'm about to reference, on the fact that I only have a bachelor's degree, but now I should know, right? Because we're not that far apart. But other than that, I also did not study in the sciences, but you did some sort of work in university on tropical soil improvement?
Yeah, I did. So I started off in the whole, vitamins, pills, things, pharma. I thought it was really cool. And technology. So it was mostly analytical chemistry and so on. So I started at the technical college for that. And then I went to Guelph University, and there I started studying biochemistry. And I was kind of in the whole thing, the lab and this and that, and I loved it. But there came a point, I was always an environmentalist. There came a point where I was concerned about the environment, and I felt I needed to do something with the environment. So I started, even though I was in the biochemistry, and actually I did a minor in molecular genetics, there came a point where there was one course that we had to take we had to just do a thesis and a research project. And I don't know how I came across it, but I came across something that was called Terra Preta, which is an anthropologic soil based in Brazil. I had no idea that ancient Indians used to create their own soil. I was like, wow, what is this? And so my advisor had a background in soil science and soil microbiology. That was his, Dr. Trevors was his name. And that was his big thing. So, and he had a very open mind about anything that was a little different from the norm, scientific norm. So I decided to study that. And it just got me into a path that was amazing, enlightening. I was just amazed by what I was discovering, that you could actually, that human beings have in the past had the technology and the know-how to improve, tropical soils, which is one of the bases of deforestation in Brazil and other places, because for some reason, and this is another thing I discovered, was that you cannot do regular agriculture in the tropics because first of all, the soils are different, the environment is different. You have torrential rains mixed with extreme dry seasons and droughts. So it devastates the soil, and you cannot do traditional agriculture. You shouldn't do traditional agriculture because the soil just, after a while, it doesn't support it for a very long period of time. And I didn't know that back then either, because I had never lived in the tropics. And so it amazed me that that ancient Indians knew how to, live in harmony with their soils, and even improved it and created fertile soils that that people are still mining today in Brazil. They're mining the soils. Yeah.
Wow. Fascinating. So I think this is a nice tie-in then to the fact that you moved to Panama, where you are now, and you are farming in, for all practical purposes, in a tropical environment. So these things seem to have led you quite nicely here, which I think will become more apparent with some of these questions. But when did you move to Panama?
I moved to Panama in 2004.
Okay.
I have no idea how I got here, so don't ask me. It was just, I don't know. It was one of those serendipitous moments. just bizarre how one thing led to another, and I ended up here. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So I had gathered, I was just reading the Tierra Mia website, and I'd gathered that things sort of started in 2004. Now, did the farm start in 2004, or did that come a little bit later?
The farm started a little later. Once I moved here, which was, if northern spring, if you want to call it, spring of 2004, I ended up marrying a man who was in real estate. So I've always wanted to have a farm because, this whole childhood thing about farms. And then, so he was always looking for good deals, and land happened to be really cheap here at the time. And it was like a big boom in real estate. We were in the real estate boom. So we were always looking for a piece of land. We got one very quickly. And I believe it was around the end of 2004 where we got this piece of land. But, it was a process because we had to buy it, and we bought it, right of possession. We had to title it. So it was a whole process. So I didn't begin actually working. We didn't actually begin working on the farm, I believe, until 2005, at the beginning of 2005.
Well, you didn't waste much time. I know, because I'm sure the land acquisition in and of itself was quite a process. So I also gathered, and you can tell me how accurate this is, but from the website, that the farm started out with including, or maybe exclusively, I don't know, in organic vegetables, but today clearly looks like it's super focused on poultry, chickens, and eggs, and corn, if I understand right, and maybe some other things. But can you talk a little bit about the evolution of what you've been doing there versus what's happening today?
Yeah. Well, we had this piece of land. We didn't really know what we wanted to do with it. It was during the time where land was so cheap, and we wanted to have a family farm. So it was, we had no idea what we were going to do with it. I was just happy I had a piece of land. And
how big is the property, by the way?
It's about 8 hectares.
Okay.
Yeah, it's around 8 hectares. And so we surveyed it, we put a road in. That was it. It had nothing on it. It just had like an internal road. Didn't even have a gate. It had a road, but it didn't have a gate. So I was like, okay, well, I have this piece of land. I know how to do, I studied theoretically how you improve soil. And the soil was completely degraded because it was part of this whole culture here where they keep nature at bay with yearly burning. So here, because it's the easiest way to keep, what they call the monte, in order to keep the shrubs down and all the weeds, because, in land here in the tropics, if it's not forest, it turns very quickly into impenetrable bush. So one of the ways that they keep this, clean, as they call it, and, making sure there's no snakes or whatever animals, is they burn it yearly. Every dry season, they burn it and they burn it and they burn it. And what happens is with the burning, you degrade the soil tremendously. You're killing the ground cover. And they obviously cut the trees as well. So it was one of those pieces of land that has been continuously cut and burned throughout its, very long history. And not only that, this piece of land is in an area that's interesting because it has very, very high clay content. And this clay is used here by locals to mine for clay to make pottery.
Okay.
And so also, not only that, what they do is they have dug holes in it to harvest the clay. So there's tons of holes in this, which I didn't show you because this was during it's actually in the forest. So we have these huge pits. The first thing that I did was to regenerate. I realized how important trees are in tropical agriculture. So the first thing I did is I took the transition zone, which is the area between the forest and the plains, if you want to call it, the open areas. And that transition zone is usually the most fertile land because everything else it was impossible to grow anything. So that transition zone, because it's the most fertile because it's closest to the trees and because it gets some of the leaf cover from the trees, when the leaves fall. And I planted trees there. So I kind of extended the original forest that had some trees in it. Not much and a lot of bush, but it had creeks through it. So it was kind of maintaining its fertility there. Because Panamanians, even though, they do a lot of damage to open areas, they know at least one thing that they're good at is protecting creeks. It's very ingrained in them to protect creeks. So they usually don't cut trees around creeks or bush. They always protect those. So that's a really good thing. So I planted a whole bunch, and it was a food forest essentially, which is all fruit trees, a lot of native fruit trees. And that was the first thing I did. And then that's when I said, okay, the next step was, I was a little concerned about, chemical or agricultural chemical residues on foods here in Panama. Because I know they were using it indiscriminately. So I decided, well, let's see if I can do a plot of land and grow something. And I found the most fertile land that I could find, and I grew something there and some tomatoes and things. And I struggled a little bit, and I started improving the soil. And I actually used those same concepts from Terra Preta from Brazil, and which is a high charcoal content. I started doing additives to the soil, and I grew, and I had a good harvest, and it was for us mainly. But then, I had neighbors and friends that were interested. So then I started, selling some to them. And then later on, I thought, hey, this is kind of cool. It's kind of working. And I started expanding the little plot of soil. I think I showed you the original plot that we started with. So we started there, and then I said, well, maybe I can do a little business out of this. And then I started selling these baskets to people's homes. I would get whatever, what is it? Community supported agriculture. I think it's called CSA. I believe it's called. Okay. There was nothing like that here. There was no certified organic vegetables. There was nothing. So I decided I was going to grow mine, and then I had people interested, and I would deliver baskets to people's homes. And word kind of spread, amongst the community that were conscientious enough to understand the whole. And then I had a few chickens as well. We had lamb. We had all sorts of animals. It was kind of like a homestead farm, except we didn't live on it. I had to travel from the city. We're still living in the city. It kind of grew into that. And then they would have add-ons. They would have, they say, add a dozen of eggs, add a chicken, add a duck. I had ducks, I had rabbit, I had everything. So it was a small little farm. But I didn't think of it as so much of a business for profits. It was more like a hobby for me. And, I took advantage of it too, because, I would feed my family with it. So that's kind of how it started.
Wow. And managing it from Panama City.
Yes, I traveled every day.
Wow. I know that. Well, I'm guessing in the beginning that was easier to do than it is today, but still that's a good amount of time on the road. And then you're out there working tirelessly, I'm sure, a lot of hours.
Well, this was then. I had my kids, so I couldn't really live here because I was having babies. I had my two girls. And so they were in school. So I had to kind of figure out the school and then come over here and do what I had to do, and then go over back and be there for them. So it was a bit of a challenge.
Wow. Super mom. It's harder than I imagined. So you made it. Yeah. It seems that you made a transition from having kind of a vegetable focus, and maybe you're doing a full circle. I don't know, but so what I saw anyway, my friend and I saw when you gave us the 50-cent tour, was a lot of chickens. We saw the egg processing. We talked about a lot of different things. What the chickens eat. Some of the things that you're doing to supplement them, to help them out, and also about the nature that you're dealing with there. And corn. Are you growing any vegetables today, and how's the corn project going?
Okay, so the reason why this whole focus changed was a number of things. Actually, it was a number of pressures. I had my life changed a little bit, well, quite drastically. after I went through a divorce, I had to close down the farm for a while.
Oh, wow.
Like I just couldn't sustain everything that I was doing at the time. So I had to shut it down for about a little over a year. And then my whole focus changed, because it wasn't into a family kind of hobby farm anymore. It became that I had to make a living, And so I decided that it wasn't going to be this kind of homestead farm anymore. It would have to be a production farm, a full production farm. So I put all my focus into the farm, and this time it really had to, sustain us, myself and the kids. So what I did was, I said, well, let's do vegetables. And, I invested into a little bit, some machinery, small machinery, and I worked the land, and I did everything that I had done more of a micro scale. I started expanding and I did it into macro scale. Unfortunately, that was around, trying to think, it was 2013. I actually moved here. We had a little shack, so we were kind of camping out on the farm. I left everything in the city because I realized I couldn't do this thing anymore. So I actually moved with my kids here. We lived in this little wooden shack. We had no electricity, nothing. We would fill up a water tank with a generator. So that's kind of how we lived, and we had no fridge. So we had I would buy this block of ice, 50 pounds. I believe it was 50 pounds of ice, and put it in this big cooler. And, I would have that. It lasted me for about a week. That was our fridge.
Wow.
So, and then I worked on the vegetables, and I decided, well, now we're going to have to do it really, well done. And, I certified the farm organic. All the vegetables were certified organic. I approached Reba Smith. I said, this is what I can produce for you. I had an arrangement with Reba Smith, and I started selling to Reba Smith. And that was around, when I finally started selling to Reba Smith, was around 2014. Unfortunately, what happened, just at the tail end of that year, we got a huge drought. I started seeing the drought in 2014, but most people know of it in 2015. Where a lot of even livestock died during that time.
Wow.
People, towns here didn't have water, not even, for showering. They would go to creeks. The creek dried up. They couldn't even bathe in creeks anymore. It was really, really severe. It was so severe that even my well that I was using for irrigating dried up. So I was kind of in a little bit of a pickle, because my crops just kept shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. Soon my well could only give me 15 minutes of water, when I would pump into our tank. And then it shrunk to 10 minutes. And that's when I said, we're not going to have enough for ourselves. So I had to abandon all the crops, and because I needed to focus that we had water for our own consumption. And for this, small amount of animals that I had, a few chickens, everything else I had sold when I closed down the farm. So it was a severe problem. So what I had to do is, I realized I wasn't making money anymore. I couldn't sell to Reba Smith anymore. And so I got a job. I got a job in a real estate office.
Wow.
And I sold real estate at the time. Actually, I had 5 jobs to try to make ends meet. Yeah. Oh, I still had a little bit of the farm going. Well, at the time I closed it off completely, but then the second stage, which I'm going to, I had that. I did some consulting. I did construction. I sold real estate, and I worked I worked in the office, as the administrator of the office.
Of the real estate office?
Yeah. So I did that to make ends meet for about a year.
Wow.
All of 2015. And then I was like, I have to do something. I have this piece of land. I can't just, so at the very beginning, around June, July 2015, I said, I have to do something. So I decided, well, with this small amount of water that I do have, and nobody wanted to come to a wells because everybody was without water. So I couldn't even get somebody to come and drill a well. And I didn't have any funds by then anyway. They wouldn't come. They just wouldn't come. So, because they were so busy everywhere else. So I decided to build a little hen house, and I put in, I remember, 250 hens. I said, well, let's see if I can sell some eggs at least. They don't require a lot of water. So that's what I did. So I built my first hen house, and the demand for the eggs were tremendous. They were just tremendous. And I realized soon that it was less work for me, and it was giving me more income than when I did vegetables. So eventually I was able to pay everything on the farm just with that one hen house. Like the work, I had one worker and me. And I was like, wow, this is pretty good. So then I expanded to a second one. And I think after the second one, I was able to already quit my job.
Wow.
I mean, we lived very frugally, but yeah. And then I said, this is it. We're going to do hens.
Wow. Well, I have to back up and ask you a series of questions here. I was laughing a little bit at the possible answer here, but how do your kids reflect on the early days of when you came to the farm and you were really roughing it?
That's a good question. My oldest, who was, I think she was around 8 at the time, she took it a little hard, maybe just her personality as well. It was a little hard at the beginning for her. She actually got really sick with chicken pox when we got here.
Oh, no.
So that was kind of, living in a wooden shack with a girl with chicken pox. It was not fun.
In Panama?
In Panama, in the heat, it was so hot because we have a zinc roof.
In the jungle, pretty much.
In the jungle with no electricity, no air conditioning, nothing,
Wow.
Yeah, it was a little tough for her. It took her maybe, but she got over it quickly. I think within 4 to 6 months, she was, she had my little one. Oh no. I always said, it's camping. We're camping. She was great. I mean, she was already a jungle girl to begin with. You could stick her anywhere and she's fine, so she loved it. She really loves it. And she, my eldest does too. They're both teenagers now, and they've kind of accepted this is your lifestyle. They don't kind of fit in with the rest of the crowd. They're now the Zoomer generation, right? They're on social media, on this, they can't go anywhere. So, they chat with other people, but nobody has this lifestyle. So they feel a little different, but I think they've come to terms with it.
Okay, so one's destined.
And we have a better living situation now. Yeah,
you do. It's quite nice there, by the way, for anyone who's concerned for her and her family. I was joking. I was joking in my head that so one's going to end up in therapy and the other one's going to embrace the farm and take over the family business one day.
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible. I don't know.
And then
no, but you know what? It's still a wholesome environment. It's actually helped me a lot. Being a single mom, having them so isolated, especially now as teenagers, is actually pretty good for me right now. It's helped me be able to parent them better. Yeah,
sure. I've heard this.
Maybe
before.
They're not too happy with it, but yeah,
they could have it worse for sure.
Yeah.
So my wife and I arrived here in 2016. We had visited in 2015, but I think that we were both. Actually, if I bring it up to Sammy, she might recall from reading or something. She was doing most of our prepping as we're trying to figure out where we're going to move to from the United States. And but for me, I won't speak for her entirely, but I was oblivious to this big drought 2014, 2015. So that's kind of scary. Is it fair to say that the chickens and the eggs have made you somewhat, if not very drought resistant now as a farmer?
Yes. We do consume a lot of water now because, we went from having 1 to 2 hen houses to now I just built my 12th. So, so now we do consume a lot of water, but, with the income we received from, as money was coming in, I was able to reinvest. And one of the first investments I did was build another well. And we were so lucky. This was, for us, I think the biggest stroke of luck that we discovered a source of water that was abundant. Just, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm trying to remember what the correct numbers are. I think our original well gave us like 9 gallons a minute, if I'm not mistaken. I think we're now at like 50, 55.
Wow.
Yeah, it was something extraordinary. we discovered some sort of an underground vein, and it's just amazing. So I feel so blessed, and I will never ever complain about too much rain ever again. It was devastating. No, the drought is something that if you haven't lived through it, you can't understand how devastating it is. It's just, you can't do anything without water. Everything starts dying. It's devastating. It really is. So the fact that we have a really good well right now that produces so much water, and we have not a crop anymore, but um, we we're producing something that doesn't require that much water. um, it gives me a lot of peace. We shouldn't ever run out of water. I'm not going to say we won't. I say we shouldn't ever run out of water. With the business that I have, the business model that I have right now, which are the hens and the chickens, and the nice well. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I have not gone back to vegetables. I've actually been afraid to. Well, there's two reasons. One is I have learned that if you really want to bring in good income enough to sustain a farm, you have to focus on one product at a time. You cannot focus on too many. So for me, it was always eggs at first. And then I received a lot of interest in chicken. People were constantly telling me, and chicken, I want chicken. There's no chicken. And I didn't want to do chicken. It was so much more complicated. I really didn't want to. I said, no, eggs. Once eggs was doing really well, I said, okay, fine, I'll do chicken. And then I started doing chicken. And there was a huge demand for chicken. And it was good too, because I had already a nice base of people that knew me from the vegetables, and they trusted in what I did, and word of mouth and so on. So I never had to do any advertising or anything. It just kind of flew on its own. I've never done any major marketing or advertising. So it was that, I count myself lucky for that. And so then I start focusing on chicken. So now we have two products. And then the chicken, we actually start with whole chicken. Then we start having different pieces of chicken, that we start cutting. So I think that was something that I've really learned through these experiences. You have to do one product at a time. Make sure it works. Make sure it's sustainable as best as you can. All the kinks in the production line, from everything from whatever you're going to do, make sure it's sustainable and solid, and then you move on to something else. So now, and the other part was, the insecurity or the fear of running out of water. I didn't want to do vegetables, and I didn't want to irrigate. I still have fear every time the dry season comes, that something's going to happen. We're going to run out.
I was going to say that I sense a feeling of like a memory thing with you, because when I order chicken from you, I always get asked, do you don't want some eggs? Because those eggs were the beginning, and they really helped you create something sustainable, and they were something that you felt more secure with in the beginning. But for anyone who's listening, or anyone who maybe thinks about ever moving to Panama, or even if you're visiting, the chicken that you produce and the eggs are amazing. I was getting very frustrated before I don't remember how I encountered your farm, but I was getting very frustrated buying chicken from the local stores. And to me, I don't know, would know a lot more about this, but to me, some of the problem is they just are not as diligent here with refrigeration during the transport handoff process. That's some of it, but I know there are other factors in store as well. Extremely frustrated at the quality, and since I've been ordering your chicken, I'm like, I'm never going to eat that stuff from the store again. It's so good.
Thanks.
It's really good. I love it, and we feel lucky that the delivery service has been available in our area too. So, amazing story though. All the things that happened adversity wise, and then things that worked in your favor, but they didn't come without a lot of hard work. Obviously, 5 jobs keeping things afloat during the drought. So, I did want to ask you, so the drought maybe has made you somewhat crisis resistant. So we've been in the pandemic we're rolling on a year pretty quick here. Tell me, maybe that, I don't know how impactful it was on your business. So how has it been? And did all those tough times with drought sort of maybe prepare you mentally for what's happening now?
Yeah, the drought definitely made me aware that in business things can change on a dime. Well, actually, I had two crises. One was when I had to shut down my farm. You know, the personal crisis, that I learned a lot from that as well, and then the drought. So I learned that business is very fickle. Things can change on a dime. You never know what's going to happen. And I already had that mentality. I knew that need to be aware of any sign and react as quickly as possible. And when the pandemic came, actually, it was funny because they closed everything down. I think it was after Carnival. People were still going to Carnival. I was already reading in the news way before Carnival about this pandemic. And actually, I had been following, because of being a scientist, I think I always knew, we were always taught that if there's anything that could affect humans on Earth in a major upset, in a major way, is a pandemic. I learned this back in school. And then I remember when President Obama would always say, he was setting up for a potential pandemic. I remember it was in the news all the time. And I was like, yeah, that's the right thing to do, because we're at any moment with the globalization that we have right now, we may end up in a pandemic again. I was so aware of that, but it was not something that was in the forefront of my mind that was going to happen now. But I knew that this could happen. And I think one of the reasons why I also probably chose agriculture in the end was because, and why I decided to live on the farm to begin with, is also with my insecurity after my divorce. I felt like if all else fails, I can grow something and eat here. I won't starve. I have a place to live, even if it's in a shack, and I can make my own food. So I think this survival was already ingrained in me, as I said, from my first crisis. My second crisis was more, how to set up the business in such a way that you can resist. So the first one was personal, make sure that I can have enough to eat for my family. And the second one is how to set up the business in a way that it will be resistant. So when the pandemic came, people need to eat. It didn't affect us. It really didn't. And actually, we got to a point at the very beginning of the pandemic where we couldn't keep up with the demand. There was so much demand. The shelves were always empty. I would deliver today and tomorrow they would call me. We were out of eggs. We're out of chicken. It was incredible. I have no idea. We were just trying to stay afloat, with the production line. The production of our products. But there's not much I could have done, because it's not something, you can't just produce more eggs on a dime. I don't think people understand. A hen produces the same amount every day. So unless I bring in a new hen, which can take about 5 to 6 months to start producing eggs, that's how long it takes to expand our production. 5 to 6 months from the day I buy the baby hens to the day they start producing. There's no way that I can expand that quickly. With chickens, it's a little easier because it's about 2 months or so. Mm-hmm. But then you have to have the space, so the production is very, it's complex. It's quite complex. Sure. That people don't understand. So, and then you have the other problem that, sometimes, sales go down, and then you have to figure out, what do I do with all these eggs, But luckily, the pandemic made us, there was maybe once this year around September where all of a sudden sales just plummeted for about a week or two. And we were like, what do we do with all these eggs? Wow. But the rest of the year, I don't know why. It was weird. It was just these 2 weeks, boom. I'm not sure if it was September, October. Yeah, it was around that time.
Interesting.
But the rest of the time it's actually been in our favor. That the production part, but in the sales, the bad part was what made it very, very difficult for us was the transport, getting the product to our clients. There's supermarkets and so on, because they shut down the roads. They had these huge lines, to get through the cercos sanitarios. What would you call that?
Well, they call them sanitary fences in English, but it's not it's basically for people who are unfamiliar with Panama and what's been going on in the pandemic, so they try to contain certain districts from crossing over into one another, which they've been marginally successful at. But one place that they can do is implement these, as they call them, sanitary fences on the highways, and try to keep people from crossing who should not be crossing, just to sort of contain infection rate. So yeah, I guess that's a good way to explain it.
Right. Yeah, the problem was it wasn't very well organized. So they did it mostly for people not to travel from one province to another, but they kind of didn't focus on the food trucks. So when our truck was going through, I remember that one of the first times they had the sanitary fence, luckily I have a very patient driver. He was stuck in line for 8 hours.
Oh my.
8 hours on the highway.
Wow.
I kid you not, 8 hours, and they weren't moving. Because it was just a mess. Like it was I don't know. I'm not sure what exactly happened. It wasn't the only time. Yeah. There were many times where he stayed 4, 5, up to, I think one more time, 8 hours. I mean, it's insane. So that was very challenging. We would have to then leave earlier. We'd have to leave very, very early in the morning. There were times we left at 2 a.m, trying to figure out how to work around that. And then sometimes we didn't know, was there a sanitary fence? Wasn't there? And then when they reopened everything again, then it was the regular traffic that we were used to. So we had to go back to original schedule. So it was a lot. It took a lot of, trying to figure out and being prepared. That was the challenging part, really. Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh, amazing. And I guess another note for people who are listening and maybe unfamiliar with Panama, we have this one highway artery currently through the country. I think I heard this week in 2040 or something, the new highway will be done, or the rail system will be complete. And so when that thing gets shut down for any reason,
only one highway.
Yeah, through the entire country. It's kind of the Highway 1, like in maybe California or something, but not even. I shouldn't even compare it to that. But it can get close for a number of reasons.
Yeah, sorry. There's one more thing that people don't understand. We have somebody that makes our feed for us, and we have our own formulas of, we decide what goes into our feed and so on, with our vitamins and so on. And the feed trucks sometimes couldn't make it either.
Aye.
So they were sometimes stuck there as well. And so it was, those parts were really challenging. Yeah.
Oh, I can imagine. But the pandemic by and large has been, I hate to say good to you, but it hasn't been so harsh on you in other regards because the demand stayed up. So that's really nice. But I'm sure that you were thinking in your head that this could be a serious problem. How can I prepare, just based on your both science and life experiences, which is really cool that you were able to do that. I really wanted to ask you, without eating too big a chunk up of the rest of your morning, something we haven't even touched on, which I thought would be really important for people to hear who care about these things, was for you to describe a couple of things. And I know there are a lot of different facets of why your farm is what it is and why it has a focus that it touts very openly on being organic. But can you describe for people what both the environment is for your chickens, and also what you alluded to about the feed, what they're being fed, and how you're involved in that?
Yeah, of course. So we have, the business we have certain focus on what's important for us, what we always try to make sure, what guides my decision making always. And one of the things is the environmental aspect, which we've already discussed. It's very important that whatever I do will never damage the environment. On the contrary, I try to, everything I do on the farm, that it has a positive impact on the environment. So that's number one. Number two is we always try to have also a positive impact on our community. That is something that guides my decision making as well. That goes anywhere from, I'm just adding that in because it's kind of part of what your question is. I make sure that the people I hire are properly paid, that I don't discriminate against anybody. And I actually try to hire more women actively, because I find that a lot of women do need jobs in this area, rural women. but don't have many options. So actually I think we're now probably at almost 80% women.
Nice.
on the farm, which sounds weird because you'd never think of farmers being women, but I don't know how it turned out better for me this way. I don't know why. It just happened one day. I had a hard time hiring men, and there's a lot of unfortunately, part of the culture is the drinking on the weekends, not arriving on Monday, and I went through some that didn't work out for me. And then one day I just said, I had women that were looking for jobs, and I never even thought of hiring them. And then I decided to hire women, and then boom, it worked out really well. So now I have both. And I have a very, very good team. I'm very happy with both. But I have, as I said, predominantly women. Everything from the quality control to even attending the hens and working on the farm and in the packaging plant as well. So, and then the other part is for me to make sure that whatever product I produce is healthy for our consumer. That's very important to me. So I make sure I use my biochemistry knowledge for that. I make sure that I don't want to have any product that could be laced with heavy metals. So I don't use, let's say, heavy metals, viruses, whatever, from my experiences and from my knowledge. So I never use anything in the feed that could be what they call here, I'm trying to, it would be flour. Yeah, it would be bone flour. A lot of people here, almost all producers use a lot of bone flour, chicken flour, fish flour in their feed.
Which is a meal, basically, is the word, right? Like
meal, yeah. I guess it's that. Yeah, sorry, harina de pescado, so it's flour. Yeah, it's meal. Yeah, bone meal. Yeah, you're right. So what they do is they essentially, I assume the bone meal comes from cows. They grind up the cows. They make a bone meal out of the bones from the cow, and that's what they add to chicken meal, to chicken feed and pig feed and all the feeds. And then and then they make chicken meal as well, which is they grind up and they burn whatever residues from the poultry production, and they make chicken meal out of it, and they feed that back to the chickens. So I remember from my days, my generation, when we went through mad cow's disease in England, when it started in England, because they were doing the same thing to cows. They were grinding up cows and feeding it back to cows. And I was very interested in that, and I remember researching it, extensively. And I thought, first of all, it's insane morally. Second of all, we obviously found that there was a component, which I believe were prions, that were infectious and reinfected the cow. So at some point, that could happen with chickens as well. Maybe it hasn't happened yet, but it will at some point. I firmly believe that. So I make sure that I don't add any of those kind of additives. We do not ever add prophylactic antibiotics or any kind of medicines, actually, at all. What we do add is phytochemicals, which are, plant-based chemicals such as oregano extract. We use that as if you want to call it a prophylactic antibiotic, oregano extract. It's essentially just to help a little bit more with immunity, especially with the meat chickens. Mm-hmm. And, other components, for example, with our hens, we add some more xanthophylls. So we do add some phytochemicals, phytonutrients, if you want to call it, to our feed that we're lucky to have here in Panama. Xanthophylls are a type of pigments that are present in marigolds and plants, and very, very beneficial for health, and luteins as well. Lutein, which is good for the eyes. So that works really well for our egg production. None of the meals, no chemicals whatsoever, no antibiotics. I'm very, very against antibiotics. So what we actually do is we try to work with probiotics, and not the kind of probiotics you necessarily ingest. Something I learned from my times of growing vegetables is that the bacteria that are in the environment essentially help to determine whether something is going to rot or something is going to decompose. So very different, like essentially, you know what I mean? Like the bad odor or whatever, or the good odors. So I like to fumigate with spray with, sorry, my Spanish words come in every now and then, with probiotics to make sure that the chickens are surrounded by beneficial organisms rather than some organisms that could cause disease. So I actually start with the environment to make sure that the environment has probiotics in it, fermented bacteria and so on that help with my production. And then talking about the micronutrients of the feed, the corn and the soy. Yes, we do use corn and soy, but we make sure that the corn is not GMO. And how do I do that? We know, or at least I know, that here in Panama, GMO corn is not permitted yet. Actually, I was in a discussion panel at one point when Melo wanted to bring in GMO corn to Panama, and they wanted to do trials. And I was on that discussion panel. It was televised and everything, about why they shouldn't. And then there was a panel of why they should. So as far as I know, that project was scrapped. So I make sure that we only buy local corn, which is non-GMO. We want to get to the point where we produce our own corn. And I've already started planting that. We're right now at the point where we're creating our own variety of corn. So I've been breeding my own corn this last year. And hopefully by next year, we will be able to use only our own corn.
Nice.
Yeah. The only component that I haven't been able to replace, unfortunately, is the soy. So that is still in the feed, but it's essentially a minor component. It's the protein component. But so that is the feed is there for them. And as I said, I create the formula with the macro and micronutrients. And it's produced for us. It's not produced for anybody else. But what we also do, the part that a lot of people, we do that we need to have some of those, we need to have our basis feed because it also has the calcium for the hens and so on. But we have then the environmental feeding, if you want to call it, which is the pasture, which is our shrubs, our edible shrubs, forages, and so on. So we do that in conjunction. So we have both. So I focus that our feed is pure, and then on top of that, we plant specific things for them, which they graze. So with the pastures, we do improved pastures, but we also have native pastures. They seem to prefer native pastures, actually, so which is a little bit difficult because every place they go is different. So today they might find this and they will forage on this. And then when we switch them, because we rotate them all the time, then they find something else. And then there's some things that we plant that they eat, like our marigolds. They eat marigolds, which are extremely high in very beneficial omega-3 fats and xanthophylls and lutein and so on as well. And we have moringa trees as well, which they like to forage on. But they decide what they want to forage on at the time, depending, I guess, on how they feel. So that part of our system is very much based on another biochemist, actually. His last name is Voisin, and he was a French biochemist, and I very much believe in what he would say. He says that our health is dependent on our soil, where our food comes from. If our soil is not, 100%, we won't receive those nutrients. So he focused mostly on cattle, on rotational grazing in cattle, and he believed that you need to rotate all the time. You need to have a large amount of animals in a small amount of space for a very short period of time. That was one of his philosophies. And he said, you do not want to remove weeds because, he said, in the case of cattle, the cattle self-medicates itself. If the cow is not feeling well at the time, or whatever it feels it needs, or needs to, has some parasites or something that it feels unwell with, will find the right plant that could be maybe slightly toxic or whatever. But toxins is, it's just like medicines, depending on the dose. So it will self-medicate. And I find the same with chickens as well. I use that philosophy philosophy, and I use it on my hens. And I find that sometimes they will eat an herb. For instance, we have one that is very powerful odor. It smells a little bit like, they call it hinojo, which I'm trying to remember the English word for it. It has a very strong odor. I actually use it as a bug repellent. They don't eat very much of it, but they will peck at it a little bit. It seems like it helps with their health. Yeah. So that's kind of the global picture of how we try to maintain the health of our hens, and how we try to make sure that we follow our own, guidelines.
And
for business.
How about the spacing that you have available for them? I thought that was something people might like to know about, and we can close up there. But so you're rotating them around. You mentioned small spaces, but they're really not so small. They've got these, from what I saw, these really large pens that they get to hang out in. And when they're in them, then they've got these sort of like large backyards that they come out in and hang out in, I guess, the majority of the day, and then they might move to another little area. How does that work, and what does it look like?
Yeah, I think that part is a little bit unique in our production because I haven't seen this before. Normally when they do free range hens, what they do is they let them out. Well, there's two types of free range hens, I should say. One is permanent structures, which is what we've done. I've decided on permanent structures rather than movable structures. Movable structures, they move them around and they move the structure to a new place, right? And then they let them out and they graze. And that's very similar to what we're doing. But the reason why I don't use movable structures is because of the security. We have so many animals that feast on our hens. It's just, we really need to have fencing around to secure them. And I have a whole bunch of big dogs that, protect them as well and keep the large animals at bay. But there's always a weasel that comes in and creates havoc in my hen houses, or, steals them from when they're outside as well. So security was very important because we live literally in the wilderness. We're at the edge of town. There's nothing for miles after this. So yeah, and the spacing, as you mentioned. So what we don't do, people that have permanent structures for their hens, as I said, they open the doors and they go into one big space. No, we have a system set up with fencing so they can rotate spaces. So they're in one space for a very short period of time. And we focus very much, as I mentioned, on the forage and on the pasture. It's a huge focus of mine. We always focus on the pasture, make sure they have pasture, because a lot of those free range essentially means they're free, but they may not have a blade of grass because they're always in the same space, and hens are very good at cleaning up a space. I mean, they eliminate, you leave them for a week and there's not a blade of grass left in there anymore. So that's why you have to rotate and give each area enough space. And yes, they're not huge spaces, but they're big. They're very, very big. I think they're pretty big, but they're not as big as, let's say, for a person that has hens in a permanent structure and doesn't have sections. So we have them all sectioned off. So they go from one section, they're there for a day, sometimes two, depending if it depends. And then they go to the next section. So they're always essentially on fresh grass and bugs, whatever they find.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's a pretty expensive. I don't think I saw the majority of it, but it's a pretty expensive operation, just for the chickens. And you're doing a lot of wonderful things out there with the land, the soil, the environment, and the products that you're bringing to people. So I really love it. I think people will enjoy hearing the story too. And I'm very grateful to have gotten acquainted with you and to have you speaking with me today like this so that we can put it on the podcast. So thank you again for your time.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. This episode was powered by ConvertKit. More than just an email marketing company, ConvertKit is focused on landing pages too, giving beginner creators everything they need to start building an email list. I've been using ConvertKit since early 2016. Their free plan allows creators to make unlimited landing pages and forms. You can choose from multiple templates, add personalization, add design, include an incentive email, create a thank you page, manage subscribers, and send broadcast emails. The support and educational resources at ConvertKit are top-notch, and that is important to me. It should be to you. To learn how ConvertKit can help you connect with your audience so that you can make a living doing the work that you love, go to morningtempo.com/convert or the show notes for this episode. Thanks again for listening. This podcast is made possible by the support of listeners like you. To learn about the different ways that you can support the podcast, visit morningtempo.com/crowd sponsor. There you can also join the Morning Tempo email list for insiders who want to know what I'm learning from the business owners and entrepreneurs that I speak with and work with, including those you hear on this podcast. Morning Tempo insiders get an occasional email from me with business insights, recommendations, hacks, and anything else I come across that could help you in your creative entrepreneurial journey. And it's free, and you can unsubscribe at any time. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe wherever you listen to your favorites. With a whole lot of love to my good friend and former bandmate Frank Salazar, who wrote and performed the Morning Tempo podcast theme song. Frank, you rock. Ciao for now.